Today I want us to look at one important aspect about exceptions, which is how do you override a method in a parent class that throws an exception. So I'm going to create a class here. I'm gonna call it class animal. Then let's see, we can just make it protected, void can swim. And then we just have, we don't need to have anything at the moment. I'm just gonna extend this animal class. So then I can decide to override the method here. And we can try to run this code Java C. Okay, I'm just gonna say main.java. Okay, the code is fine and it works fine. So now there is something about overriding method that throws an exception that you guys must be familiar with. So let's start with a method that throws, let's say we throw runtime exception. So when a subclass overrides a method that throws an exception, it can decide to ignore the throws clause totally, regardless of whatever exception is being thrown in the parent class. So what do I mean? We see that the method in the parent class throws a runtime exception, but the method in the subclass does not throw anything. So if we compile this code, it should compile. Or the method can decide to throw any other exception that it wants, or we can throw the same exception, but that rule only applies for unchecked exception. So let's assume we want to throw arithmetic exception here. Arithmetic exception here. So our code should still work fine. Any exception that we throw, which is runtime, will always work. We can decide to throw array index out of bounds exception. Don't remember. Let's see if I got it correct. Array index out of bounds. Maybe I got this wrong. Okay, let's just say index out of bounds. I think I remember this index out of bounds. Let's try that one. Index out of bound. Maybe it doesn't have bound. Does it have an S? Let's see. Okay, maybe I can just Google array index out of bound. Oh, I'm forgetting the exception part. Sorry. So I was supposed to say out of bound. Okay, let me just say exception. Okay, it works. Or we can say array index out of bounds exception. It should also work. So as we can see, when a method in the parent class throws a runtime exception, the subclass is free to override that method with any other runtime exception it actually wants. It doesn't care what kind of exception is that. As long as it's a runtime exception, it should always work. But now, if the method in the parent class throws a runtime exception, the method in the subclass cannot throw a checked exception. Let's demonstrate that. So let's say here we want to throw okay, we can just say IO exception. Obviously we have to import, because it's in Java. Is it in java.io? I'm just going to import everything in here. This will not compile. The reason for that is because when a method in the I don't want to explain it this way. I don't want to say when a method in the parent class throws a runtime exception, the method in the subclass cannot throw a checked exception. I don't want to explain it that way. This is how I want to explain it. When a method in the subclass that is overridden throws a checked exception, the method in the parent class must throw the same exception or the parent exception. Alright, this is what I mean. So for this thing to work, I should either throw the same exception or I should throw the parent exception. So if I throw exception, this code will still work. I cannot do it the other way around. So that means I cannot say IO and then here throw exception. This is not allowed. It won't work. It's like covariance. So let me go back to covariance so I can explain what I mean. There is what we call covariance return types. So if this method throws a number, returns a number. Here I'm just gonna say return null. Okay. I'm going to also copy this. Return null. This method, when you're overriding it, you can override it with any subclass of number. That is what we call covariance. So basically I can say integer, and this code will work when I compile it. But you cannot put integer here and then put number here. This is not allowed. This code won't compile. So covariance return type with and it says you can return the same type or the subclass. So the subclass can be anything. So let's say we have here object class, which is the parent of all other classes. So here you can have number if you want, because number is implicitly subclass of object. Here you can have error if you want, because error is implicitly subclass of an object. here you can have IO exception if you want. The code will still compile. So that is what we call covariance, but you cannot do the other way around. Another thing that you must be aware of is the visibility of the method that you are overriding. So as you can see, the method in the parent is protected. So when you override a method in the subclass, you cannot reduce the scope or the visibility of that method. What do I mean by that? So this method is protected. When you override it, you cannot reduce its scope to now say the method is private. The code won't run because now you are reducing the visibility or the scope of that method. The only thing you're allowed to do is to say public, because now you are increasing the scope. This one will compile. So if the method is, the scope of variables, or the scope in Java, we have first the most restrictive scope. We have, I'm just gonna put it here. We have private, we have default, we have protected, and we have public. So the reason why default is more restrictive than protected is default says anything that is in the package has access to me. But protected says anything in the package as well as subclasses. So a subclass can be outside the package, and that will still be able to work. So if this method, we don't have any access specifier, it is default. The access specifier or the visibility of it is default. So you can actually change it to protected if you want, and this code should be able to work. And you can make it public because here you are increasing the scope. But you cannot make it private because private is more restrictive than default. As you can see, the order that we have here, that is why this code won't compile. So let's go back to exception, guys. All right. So we saw that when a method in the subclass throws a checked exception, it is a must that a method in the parent class throws the same exception or the parent exception of that exception that is being thrown in the child class. Yeah, so guys, that is what I wanted to say about exception. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe.